It is so great to be here today. I was just catching up with a whole group of people I haven't seen since before COVID, which was awesome. So I'm Marie Sbrocca, and I lead UX research for the Gemini core product team at Google. Gemini used to be called Bard. It's AI, and that is the last thing I'm going to say about AI today. Instead, I'm going to talk about how we can adapt UX research to an ever-changing environment, bringing a focus on the human element, and making insights more impactful than ever. Before I jump in, I want to share a little bit about how I got to some of the realizations I'm going to share with you today. A while ago, I had an opportunity to lead UXR for something totally new, and it had all of the right ingredients. A great team, talented researchers, a problem space I was really excited about. I came in with a lot of ideas about how we should do the perfect research, the sort of thoughtful and well-triangulated research that makes a great answer to a job interview question. What could go wrong? As it turned out, actually a lot. Things were moving really fast. There were tons of changes. We ran into any number of unanticipated and sometimes very odd logistical constraints. And the questions that we really needed to answer were different than what anyone had encountered before. Perfect research was not meant for this kind of environment. This path ended kind of abruptly for me when I had a realization that we were doing everything right, everything in a technically correct way, but none of it was working. Hang on, why are we here? What are we actually trying to do? I was able in this moment to stop assuming that I knew how to do it right and start being curious, to respond instead of trying to follow a script. Everything is changing fast, and today I want to go back to the basics. Starting with, why does UX research exist? I don't think we ask ourselves this often enough. Our discipline is a chimera of sorts of academia, design, statistics, social sciences, so many different things mixed together. Unlike design or engineering, we don't actually make or build anything. Instead, UXR has impact through influence. And personally, I think there are two key reasons why UXR exists and how we can have impact. First, we can help make better decisions. We can help our teams make good decisions about our users, about the business, about our products, both by mitigating risks and also by highlighting opportunities. We're also able to help measure progress and make sure things are moving in the right direction. You should ideally be able to map your research to one of these areas. Identifying one of these underlying reasons can be really helpful to focus on the right things and communicate about what matters. So now that we've talked about the why, let's break down the how. I'm going to talk about what I see as 3 core pillars of doing UXR in a really useful way. First, understanding what's important. Second, bringing your focus to people. And third, landing it, getting your point across. Starting with understanding what's important. It's a big it depends. For research, value is not inherent. It's situational. There's not one cool trick. There's no silver bullet. Reading the situation is absolutely critical. What's important depends on the business, on the project, on the phase. The best possible research is going to be totally different if you're trying to understand why the business isn't growing versus if you're working toward a big launch. It's going to be completely different if you're trying to help the team generate big ideas versus if you're trying to build high confidence but a small change is going to be successful. Being an excellent researcher doesn't mean that you did something really complex or used 4 different methods. It means that you understood the context that you were working within and you designed an effective solution. So let's talk about a few examples of throwing out the rule book in a good way. A personal favorite is UXR consulting. Sometimes the most impactful and effective research is actually no new research at all. There's a researcher I work with who's very talented, they're very experienced, and they have a really deep expertise in their domain. And they do a fantastic job of this. In the time I've worked with them, I've seen them embed so closely with our engineering team and truly become a trusted expert on our users. Even when there's not enough time to do net new research, they're able to be a voice in the room and share a different perspective and a different set of opinions to help the team make better decisions. Another example, don't make it harder than it needs to be. Your job is already hard enough. Sometimes simple research can be the most impactful thing, even in a very complex situation. I think usability testing sometimes gets a bad rap because it's easy and also kind of boring. But sometimes it's really the right thing to do. There's another researcher I work with, also really talented, really experienced, who found themselves in a situation where there were so many questions coming up really quickly. And they took a step back, evaluated, and they determined that the right approach was to do a lot of concept testing. Their research itself wasn't that exciting, but they did an incredible job of responding to the situation, building relationships with their stakeholders, and really understanding what the team needed to know and when to make effective decisions. It may be a tough thing to hear, but I think a big unlock for me was realizing that no one really cares about your research for its own sake, except maybe other researchers. To the team, research is a part of a much bigger picture. Which brings me to my next point, people. People are one of the most critical parts of your job as a UXR, and not just because you study them. Back to that whole thing about impact through influence. You should always know who your stakeholders are and what they care about. These could be your peers, they could be PMs, engineers, designers, they could be senior executives. They don't have to agree on the how, but it's critical to be aligned on the why. I like to use 3 questions to help everyone get aligned on the why before kicking off any new piece of research. First, what are the most critical questions you will have answered by the end of a study? Second, what decisions will these insights inform? And third, is there an expiration date after which these insights won't be useful anymore? If you don't have time to do this, you may be doing too many things. This takes very little time up front and can be really helpful to anchor to make sure you're all focused in the same direction. Beyond stakeholders, we're all humans here. It's so tempting to talk about PM, engineering, UX, whatever. These are all people too. And building rapport with humans goes so much farther than focusing on roles. It's helpful to keep in mind that these humans may have no idea what you, the UXR in the room, does. No matter how senior they are, deferring to them can be a huge disservice to everyone. If it seems like a weird request, if they're asking you for all kinds of research that doesn't make sense, follow up, learn more, understand where they're coming from. You were hired to do your job because you are the expert in building the team's understanding of your users and helping the people around you make better decisions with that information. You were hired for your job because you're curious, you're empathetic, and you bring so much more to the table than just data or insights. You're amazing. Your ideas and perspectives add so much value. And UX research is not a vending machine. This is where the we're all humans part comes back in. It's easier to understand irrational or challenging behavior when you think about stakeholders as people versus abstracted engineers or PMs. People have trouble feeling confident when the stakes are high. People aren't always good at telling you when they don't understand something. And sometimes people get very stressed out and smash all the buttons. It can be hard to take the time to build rapport and scary to push back, but this is critical to building trust. Which brings me to my last point, landing it. Research can only have an impact if someone is able to use it. Invest in being able to clearly articulate what your work means, why your stakeholders should care, and what they should do about it. Trust is absolutely critical here. For people to act on what you tell them, they have to trust you. And trust that you're focused on the right things. This is also key to landing. More is not always better. Focus on doing the right thing versus trying to do everything. Based on my personal experience, everywhere I've ever worked, I think there might be mountains of research out there that very few people are able to use, and relatively few studies that really make a difference. Utility will beat volume every time. And the same thing goes for how you share. Don't bury the lead. A longer report or share out can be really tempting. You learned so many things. You have all of these great insights. However, especially with more senior stakeholders, you get a very limited amount of their time and their attention. I like to tell my team to focus on the one most important thing they need to land in any presentation in the first 1 minute. That way, even if folks get distracted, if they lose their attention, you get your point across. An extreme example of this that I kind of like, a PM leader who I worked with at one point and had a good relationship with, wasn't really engaging with my team's work in the way that I wanted. And I was talking with them one day, and they said, "Hey, I know your team did the research right. I trust you all. You're good researchers. And no offense, but I don't care about the details at all. That's not a good use of my time to learn about that. I want you to come to me, and I want you to tell me what are the 2 or 3 things that I need to know from any given piece of research, and then also brainstorm with me. Tell me what you think I should do about it. And then if I have questions, I'll follow up with you." This was a really big realization for me because it helped me move from thinking about research as its own complete thing to seeing how it fit into a bigger whole and how it mattered to the people around me. When I think about landing work, I think one of the hardest things to get right is how to deliver bad news. It's great to highlight the opportunities. It's fun to highlight the opportunities. You did a study. Everyone loved it. It's so exciting. You have all these great quotes. But what about when something goes wrong? What about when it's risks that come up? Useful research often uncovers things that may be hard for the people around you to hear because of all of those very human reasons we talked about earlier. The stakes are high. They're stressed out. I learned this lesson in a very difficult and embarrassing way, and I'm going to share that with you and then a few things I learned from that experience. Many years ago, at a previous job at a previous company, I woke up one morning at about 7:30 a.m. to a phone call from my former boss who wanted to know why the CTO of our 6,000-person company had sent her a strongly worded email about a survey I had just conducted. The survey itself was fine. It was an appropriately conducted survey. There were no issues there. However, the results had come in a few days earlier, and they were really bad. Our users were not having a good time with a handful of different things. So I did what any good researcher would do, right? I put together a pithy deck. I sent it out to about 25 different engineering directors. I scheduled a share out for the next day, and I made sure that everyone else knew just how bad this was. However, unbeknownst to me and unbeknownst to a lot of people who received this deck, this was not news. This was something that, in fact, an entire team was already working on fixing. However, before we connected those dots, a couple of folks in the audience forwarded this deck to the CTO, who was also somewhat alarmed, who circled back with my boss. And fortunately, this didn't lead to any major fallout, just a few awkward conversations and some embarrassing apologies. But I learned a lot. I learned that there's a good way to deliver bad news, and I'd like to walk through that now. First, back to understanding the people. Making sure you really know what they care about, what's important to them, what they might be stressed out about. Are there things in your news that are going to really trigger them? I learned that upsetting everyone is not a good strategy to get them to listen to you. Another piece here, finding an ally. You don't have to share bad news alone. Finding someone else who knows you well, who you have trust with, can help you understand if there's something else you need to know about the context that you're sharing this news in, if there are perhaps solutions already in place, Or if there aren't, what you might do about it together. Next, thinking about the forum. There's a lot you can do to create an environment for your insights to land in. This may be thinking about if it's something to share one-on-one versus in a large group. It may be thinking about sharing in writing versus a presentation versus a conversation. You can also think about the framing, and I like to really emphasize the opportunities, not just the problems. Where can you go from this? Don't make it a dead end. It's also really helpful to avoid catastrophizing. Telling someone, hey, I'm sharing these risks with you so that you can make a better informed decision goes a lot farther than saying everything's terrible and I don't know how to fix it. Finally, anticipate the outcome. Think through this. Every time you have to share bad news, think about what will likely happen. And then you can take steps in advance to avoid an outcome you don't want. So, quick recap. We talked about 3 things today. Number 1, read the situation. Understand what's important. 2, we're all humans here. Focus on the people. And 3, land your work. Get your point across. So now I'd like to take a moment to imagine all of these things are true in your research practice. You approach it with curiosity. You keep the big picture in mind. Your goal is helping the team make better decisions and make sure you're on track, not trying to do perfect research. You focus on the people and you get to respond to real humans, not just abstract stakeholders. And you have strategies to get your points across. Even when it's bad news, you know what to do. What would that be like? Personally, that's a future for UXR that I'm really excited about. So thank you, everyone. I'm Marie. Thank you so much.